Russia has been committing provocations against NATO for years, predating the big invasion of Ukraine, but stepping up since then. And basically NATO and countries in Europe have done nothing back. They should do something back. Ideally, what has to happen, this step becomes the start of a major air defense system, which projects out into another 100, 200 kilometers beyond the NATO border, which means it covers, for example, parts of Ukraine, parts of Belarus, and that becomes a kill zone of anything coming towards NATO borders. That's the longer-term solution. But in the short term, might be a reason to send Ukraine advanced weapons, saying that Russia's doing this, we need to make sure Russia pays a price, because we're not going to take this anymore.
So in your mind then, especially if this could mean at least some form of NATO support for Ukraine in the air, this could really have been a misstep by President Putin.
Well, the idea is to demonstrate to the Kremlin, when they conduct hostile acts towards us, they pay a price. They've been doing this for years and we've done nothing, and that's a serious problem. That has been little by little undermining NATO security.
And there is no doubt in your mind that this was a deliberate provocation by the
Russians? Well, if you listen to Russian propagandists, this was a false flag operation that the Ukrainians, maybe what the Poles did. But oh sure, the Ukrainians have time for this. No.
And would you be happy to see US forces involved in air defences that stretch into Ukraine? And do you think the current US administration would back that idea?
Well, certainly President Trump's reaction was not that of a strong superpower leader. But then we know sometimes he'll say something and then the policy actually is much stronger. We saw that, for example, in the run-up to and then the actual convening of the NATO summit this summer. But certainly, the United States has a vital interest in keeping Russian revisionism at bay in Europe, and not just in Europe. So from that point of view, it's very much in American interest to be part of this.
And do you think there should be more concern as well, given that there are a number of Russian troops massed near the Polish border for the joint military drills with Belarus?
Look, I think we have to pay attention to that. We have to be prepared for that. But Putin does not want a confrontation with NATO. What Putin wants is to, by smaller steps which become larger, to undermine NATO's deterrent capacity. So again, we have to be prepared for any contingency, but I don't think that's likely.
And of course, you've been at the very timely Yalta European Security Conference. Presumably there's been much discussion of these recent events. Have you heard positive things there?
The YES conference held every September here is usually quite impressive. And this year, perhaps even more impressive than usual. And certainly the Kremlin provocation in Poland has been part of the discussion, as has the need for Europe to become much more active and much more robust in its own defense measures and its own defense industry. And we've discussed all of this here, and the discussion continues.
And you mentioned the US there. Have you seen much concern from the delegates here about the relatively limited response out of the White House to the attack on Poland?
Well, again, I don't think anyone who takes the threat posed by an aggressive Kremlin to NATO, to Europe, to Ukraine, thinks that the response thus far from Washington has been sufficient. But again, we've seen a pattern where sometimes, again, President Trump says things and then the actual policy winds up being much stronger, much wiser.
And Russia's Primorsk oil port has been struck overnight. I mean, the Ukrainians, regardless of what Europe are doing, are continuing their retaliation. It's one of the main oil export ports in Russia. It's also a hub for the Russian Shadow Fleet. Is there room here for the West to provide more support to Ukraine's long-range strikes alongside sanctions on the Russian oil industry?
This is a no-brainer. What the Ukrainians have done is extraordinary, and we should encourage it. I mean, I remember when Jake Sullivan came here to tell them to stop doing that, which was a very poor look, demonstrating that weakness in the White House has been a problem throughout this war.
And do you think it's time for European nations as well to do things like perhaps Germany providing the Taurus long-range missile?
Well, I saw a report today, which is not confirmed, and that's fine, that actually they've begun to provide Taurus missiles to Ukraine. I hope that report is true.
Do you think as well that the White House is right to be starting to put some level of pressure on its European partners to follow their lead in sanctioning countries like India for their purchase of Russian oil?
I think yes, as long as that's not an excuse for delay proceeding with sanctions, the United States and Europe together. And it's also worth noting that, one, Europe has cut its purchases of hydrocarbons from Russia by 80%. And two, virtually all of the purchases now made in Europe come from rogue actors, Hungary and Slovakia.
US envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has been here in the last few days. What do you make of his actions in Ukraine?
I think he clearly understands how important it is for the United States that Putin not conquer Ukraine. And therefore, he's an ideal person to be advising President Trump on how to achieve the durable peace that is Trump's stated goal.
And we've also had Britain's new Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, visiting. Would you have any advice for her as a diplomat working with the Ukrainians?
Well, I think that, frankly, amongst major Western powers, the Brits have probably been the strongest since the big invasion began. And you credit Boris Johnson for that because he was PM at the time. And his successors have pretty much followed his lead. Although maybe they would not want to put it that way, but they've pursued a similarly robust policy. And Starmer's been excellent in his interaction with Trump to ensure that the US is doing the right thing.
And do you think that a coalition of the willing support for Ukraine is still likely? And
yes.
Is it effective as a threat to Russia or a dissuasion to Russia?
Were it not effective vis-a-vis the Kremlin, we wouldn't be hearing Kremlin screams that there's no way in the world they'll accept this. And that's just one more bit of evidence that Putin's not interested in a durable peace that enables him to hold on to the territory he's already stolen from Ukraine. Putin wants maybe not the entire country, but he wants effective political control of the country, which means he needs to control all of Ukraine east of the Dnipro River, the entire coastline of the Black Sea, to leave what's left under control of Ukrainians small and landlocked.
And speaking to Ukrainians today, and in your relatively frequent compared to most visits to Kiev, do you get the sense that there is that sense of morale and belief that Ukraine can still withstand the Russian invasion?
Well, they don't have any choice, because Russian intentions towards Ukraine are at least nearly genocidal. Some people say they are genocidal. They want to erase Ukrainian identity, and they treat brutally Ukrainians who they control if they do not accept the fact that they are quote-unquote little Russians.
Well, Ambassador John Herbst, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
My pleasure, thank you.